The snow came down like a warning, thick sheets of white hammering the windows of a nearly forgotten roadside diner, its neon signs swinging weakly in the wind. Jack and Emily's truck stop, half-lit and barely holding on. Inside, Emily moved like someone chasing ghosts. Her cardigan pulled tight against the chill. She wiped the counter again, not because it needed cleaning, but because habit was sometimes the only thing that kept the silence from taking over. Outside, the storm had swallowed the highway whole. Beyond the glass, there was no world, only the pale blur of snow and wind, and the skeletal flicker of the sign that once welcomed travelers with coffee and warmth. Now, it flickered like an echo of better days, blinking tiredly against the night. It wasn't just the blizzard that had emptied the booths and silenced the grill. The real damage had come long before. The new highway, 6 miles west, gleaming and efficient, had siphoned away the river of trucks that once gave this place life. The kind of slow death that doesn't crash down in one blow but erodes quietly, invoice by unpaid invoice, one empty table at a time. The clock ticked past 7. Time to close. Emily's hand reached for the open sign, ready to turn it around, to lock the door on another day that felt like defeat. And then, the bell above the door jingled, sharp and unexpected, slicing through the heavy quiet like a crack of light. A man stepped in. Snow clung to his heavy coat, melted in dark patches across his shoulders. His boots left wet prints on the worn floorboards as he pulled back his hood. His face was weathered, creased by long roads and harsh winds, and his voice, when he spoke, was rough as gravel. "Any chance you're still serving?" he asked. "Interstate's shut down. 15 miles back. Ain't nowhere open." Emily's eyes drifted past him to the blizzard outside, then to the empty shelves behind her. A half pot of stale coffee, a few cans, some bread going hard at the edges. That was it. Not enough for a crowd. Not even enough for one man and his hunger. But something in his eyes, the exhaustion, the quiet ask without pride, touched something buried deep inside her. She gave a small nod. "Come in. Warm yourself up." He slid onto a stool at the counter. Moments later, the bell jingled again. Then again. One by one, more truckers stumbled in, shoulders hunched, faces red with cold, boots heavy with snow. 12 in total. 12 stranded men with no place left to go. Behind the counter, young Ethan froze, a rag in his hand, his expression somewhere between fear and disbelief. Jack sat in his corner, his old wheelchair tucked into the shadows, his denim jacket draped over frail shoulders. He said nothing, but his eyes flicked to the door, to the gathering crowd. And in that single moment, a flicker of something long lost passed through his gaze, something alive. Emily didn't wait for a plan.
She didn't ask what they had left.
She simply looked at Ethan and said, "Use what we've got. No one sleeps cold tonight." That was all. The decision hung in the air like a match strike in the dark. The grill hissed back to life. The coffee brewed again. Stale bread became toast. Soup simmered from whatever was left in the cans. And somehow, the little diner, on the edge of being forgotten, became something else entirely. The windows fogged with breath and warmth. The storm held outside, furious and endless. But inside, boots stomped, men laughed low and tired, stories spilled out like heat. The cold might have stolen the road, but it couldn't have the night. Not this one. Not here. Emily moved through it all, quiet, sure, steady. A woman who'd spent a lifetime holding broken things together with kindness and will. And even as she leaned against the counter, watching the last of the food disappear into grateful hands, she asked herself the question she didn't dare speak aloud. Could anything good survive a winter like this?
She didn't know yet.
But deep inside, something stubborn, a flicker, maybe still burned. And 2 days from now, the ground itself would tremble with the answer. Long before the snow came, before the highway left them behind, before the diner became a ghost of its former self, Jack was a man of motion. The kind of man who stood taller than a storm, whose laughter filled rooms like a song too big to be silenced. Back then, the diner was alive, and so was he. Back then, He was the one who grilled the steaks, joked with the truckers, fixed the neon sign himself when it shorted in the rain. His hands, strong, stained with grease and glory, were always doing, always building, always carrying weight. He had been a Marine once, the kind of soldier who didn't brag, didn't boast. But you saw it in his eyes. The steel, the stillness. You felt it in the way he walked into a room, like he was always scanning for something that others couldn't see. He never talked about the tours, never said what he left behind in the sand or the jungle or the heat. But when a child cried in the parking lot, he moved fast. When a man raised his voice at a waitress, Jack didn't even need to stand. Just one look, and it was over. That was the kind of man he was.
Steady.
Unshakable. Until the accident. It wasn't war that broke him. It was a sharp curve and a cold road one December night. A drunk driver. A flash of headlights. A screech that tore through the air like metal against bone. Emily had been in the passenger seat. Jack was behind the wheel. The truck rolled twice. Her body flung against glass. Jack's spine shattered like it had been waiting for the blow. When he woke, there were no bombs, no battlefield. Only white ceilings and the beeping of machines that counted time and heartbeats. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just stared. And when they told him he would never walk again, he didn't ask why. He just nodded, like he'd expected it. Like part of him had always known it would come to this. After that, the light left his eyes in pieces. He didn't talk much. Didn't go out. He stopped fixing things. Stopped greeting the customers. His hands, once proud and precise, now just rested on the cold arms of his wheelchair, still and empty. The man who had once roared with life became a silent fixture in the corner booth. A shadow in a place that used to be his world. Emily stayed. Of course she did. Her loyalty wasn't the kind that left when it got hard. But even her kindness couldn't pull him back. Not completely. She would place a coffee next to him each morning, just the way he used to like it. 2 sugars, no cream, but it went cold most days, untouched. Ethan, the boy who swept the floors and washed the dishes, used to sit beside him sometimes, talking about school or girls or the stupid things kids said online. Jack would listen, his gaze distant, somewhere behind the walls, behind the years. He rarely answered. But once, just once, he reached over and adjusted the boy's grip on a wrench when the sink was leaking. "Not like that," he murmured. "You'll strip the thread." It was barely a whisper, but it was something. At night, when the diner was empty and the windows turned to mirrors, Jack often sat in the dark alone, staring at the neon sign as it flickered outside, blinking like a dying star. No one knew that sometimes he rolled himself to the back, to the storeroom where his old uniform hung beneath a sheet of dust and forgotten paint cans. He never touched it, just sat there in silence, letting the past breathe around him. He didn't hate the world. He just didn't believe it had use for him anymore. There was one photo he kept, tucked behind the napkin dispenser at his booth. It showed a younger Jack, arms around 2 fellow Marines, mud on their boots, fire in their eyes. Behind them, a chopper rising into the dusk. The corner of the photo had burned slightly.
No one knew how.
But Jack looked at it like it was still warm. He hadn't spoken of that time since the accident. Not once. He hadn't told anyone about the dreams. The one where he still felt his legs running through smoke. Or the other one, the worse one, where he couldn't move, couldn't scream, while someone screamed for him. Pain like that doesn't go away. It settles. Finds a home. Lives in your bones like a second heartbeat. But pain also listens. It watches. And on the night when 12 cold strangers stepped into the diner, when Emily gave them food she didn't have and warmth she couldn't afford, Jack's pain did something it hadn't done in years.
It moved.
Not fast. Not loud. Just a flicker, a weight shifting, like something inside him had opened its eyes after a long, long sleep. And though no one knew it then, not Emily, not Ethan, not even Jack himself, something had begun. The storm had not let up. Outside, the wind howled like a wolf that had tasted blood, rattling the windows as if trying to claw its way inside. Snow fell in thick, Vengeful sheets, swallowing the highway and smothering every sound beneath a blanket of white silence. But inside the diner, there was light, flickering, stubborn, refusing to die. Emily moved like a ghost behind the counter, her smile trembling but still intact. The pantry was almost bare. She had already served canned soup she'd thinned with water and called chowder, passed off stale bread as toasted rustic rolls, and poured the last of the milk into lukewarm coffee. But the strangers at the tables didn't complain. They were tired, soaked, grateful. Truckers, a couple with a crying baby, an old man with 2 dogs in his coat, even a woman in a red dress and heels, like she had been running from something worse than the storm. And there was Ethan, running between tables, making jokes, handing out sugar packets like they were gold. Jack sat in his booth, the one by the window, silent as ever. The snow pressed against the glass just inches from his face, a reminder of the cold that used to live inside him. He watched them all. Emily's worn hands, Ethan's awkward kindness, the way the people, despite the chill and fear, leaned a little closer to one another. Something was different tonight. Something ancient. Like the diner, forgotten by time, had remembered itself for one last night. And then came the knock. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't loud. But it stopped everything. Emily froze. Ethan dropped a spoon. Jack's eyes narrowed. The knock came again, measured, cold. When Emily opened the door, 3 men stepped in. They didn't speak right away. Just stood there, dripping snow, scanning the room with eyes that didn't belong to travelers. They were dressed for the storm, but too clean, too deliberate. One wore a wool coat, too fine for a place like this. Another had gloves he never took off. The third one, silent, lean, with a scar down his cheek, carried something darker in his stare. Jack saw it instantly. Predators. Wolves in a house full of tired sheep. They didn't order food. They didn't ask for warmth. They simply walked in, sat down, and waited like they owned the place. One of them slid a silver briefcase under the booth table. Another kept glancing at the door, like expecting someone else to follow. The mood shifted.
Talk dimmed.
The baby stopped crying. Emily approached them anyway.
Of course she did.
Brave, foolish, gentle Emily. Coffee, she asked, her voice warm, rehearsed. The man in the coat smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes.
Sure, he said.
Black. And keep it coming. Jack watched everything. The way the man never looked at the cup, only at the people. The way one of them touched something under his jacket just once. And the way Emily's hands shook when she poured that coffee.
Something about the air changed.
It thickened. The kind of quiet Jack had known long ago, before gunfire. The kind of quiet where you felt death watching, waiting. Then suddenly, the sound of tires outside. A 4th man burst in. He was bleeding from the temple, out of breath. "We got a problem," he hissed. And in that moment, it all unraveled. They were running from someone or with something. And whatever they had in that briefcase, it wasn't money. Jack could feel it like a drumbeat behind his ribs. He didn't need details. He only needed instincts. The storm hadn't brought travelers. It had brought trouble. And it had brought them here. The scar-faced one pulled out a gun. A scream broke out. Ethan moved to shield a child. The man barked an order. Nobody leaves. Nobody talks. The diner was no longer a refuge. It was a cage. Emily was trembling. Jack saw it, and something inside him cracked. Not fear. Not anger. Memory. He saw the face of a young Marine behind a sandbag wall. He heard a voice calling for cover. He saw blood. He saw dust.
He remembered pain.
And he remembered what came after. Purpose. Jack's hands, long still, tightened on the wheels of his chair. He didn't move right away. He waited, observed, calculated. The scarred man paced like a wolf, controlling the floor. The one with the coat handled the briefcase. The nervous one, too young, too wired, stood by the door with the gun trembling in his grip. Jack rolled backward, slow, into the shadows. In the kitchen, he still kept tools. Not weapons, he hadn't needed those in years. But cast iron pans, boiling water, sharp knives. And a fuse box. He spoke his first words that night not to the strangers, but to Ethan, barely a whisper. When the lights go out, get them low. Protect the exits. Ethan's eyes widened. What? Jack looked at him, really looked at him, and said, I'm not asking. Do it. And then, for the first time in almost a decade, Jack moved with purpose. Not fast, but steady. He reached the fuse box. 1 breath.
2.
Darkness.
Shouts. Panic.
The baby cried. A crash. And in the pitch-black void of that snow-wrapped diner, something ancient stirred. Jack was no longer the man in the booth. He was a shadow. A ghost. A force reborn. He moved through memory. Through instinct. Using every sound, every flicker, every heartbeat. There were screams. A scuffle. The sharp clang of metal. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. A gun discharged once, twice, but missed its mark. When the lights flickered back on, 3 men were on the ground. The briefcase had been kicked open. Documents fluttered like feathers, some marked with seals and warnings in red. And in the center of it all, covered in sweat, blood on his hands, breath ragged, but standing.
Jack.
Not just standing, rising. Legs trembling, frame leaning against a broken counter, but upright. Emily cried out, not from fear, but from awe. Ethan stared like he was seeing a myth step out of smoke. Jack didn't speak. He didn't need to. He had done what no one expected. He had remembered who he was. And the fire that had once died in his soul? It had risen again, fierce and bright. From the ashes of a man the world had forgotten. The clock had long passed midnight, though time had no meaning anymore. The diner, once a quiet sanctuary on the edge of nowhere, now sat suspended in a moment that felt too large for the walls to contain. The snow still howled outside, blanketing the world in an eerie silence, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. The 3 men lay restrained on the floor, their weapons scattered, and their plans in ruins. One moaned softly through a bloodied lip. Another stared up at the ceiling, his expression empty, as though realizing that whatever they'd been chasing had finally slipped through their fingers. The baby in the corner cried again, this time not from fear, but hunger. The mother clutched the child tightly to her chest, shivering, whispering lullabies into the tiny ear. A trucker helped an old man to his feet. Someone passed around a dented thermos of cold tea like it was a sacred offering. The woman in the red dress finally sat, her legs too tired to fake grace any longer. And Jack stood in the center of it all. Not tall, not strong in the way he once was, but standing, upright. A man not reborn, but revealed, stripped of silence, bared in resolve. He looked down at his hands. They shook. Not from fear, but from weight, of action, of memory, of a truth he could no longer hide behind. Emily approached, tears still trembling in her eyes, but her voice was steady. You're hurt, she whispered. He shook his head. Not enough to matter. Ethan moved close, eyes wide with disbelief, still holding the fire extinguisher he'd used in the chaos. Jack, you walked. Not far, Jack said, the corner of his mouth twitching into something that might have been a smile. But far enough. The room settled into a hush.
Not fear this time.
Not confusion. But something deeper. Recognition. Because in that flickering diner light, surrounded by strangers and steam and silence, they all saw what they had not dared name, how close they had come to losing not just their lives, but their dignity. Emily's voice broke the quiet. We need to call the sheriff. Jack nodded.
Use the landline.
Cell service is still out. The young man by the door, the 4th one, the one who'd burst in, began to stir. He was barely more than a boy. 18, maybe 19. His lip quivered. We didn't mean to hurt nobody, he muttered. It was just a job. I didn't even want. Jack turned to him slowly. Not as a soldier, not as an executioner, but as a man who had seen war, seen regret, seen what came after. Then why did you come with a gun? Jack asked. Not coldly. Just human. The boy didn't answer. Outside, The wind shrieked like it had something to confess. Inside, it was warm. The old radiator clinked back to life. The coffee pot hissed. The world, impossibly, resumed. But something had changed. A trucker stood up. "That was hell of a thing, old man," he said, rubbing his neck. "You saved our lives." Jack didn't reply. He only looked out the window, at the darkness, as if searching for someone long gone. Emily stepped behind the counter, hands trembling less now, and poured a new pot of coffee. Her movements were quiet, reverent, like ritual. She placed a cup in front of the woman in red, another in front of the trucker, another for Jack. Someone began humming. A child asked for crackers. Life, stubborn as ever, pressed forward. And then, unexpectedly, the scarred man on the floor spoke, his voice hoarse, mocking. "You think this changes anything? You think stopping us makes you a hero?" Jack turned, slow and steady, his gaze sharp but not cruel. "No," he said. "It makes me a man again." That silence that followed was different. Not fear, not awe, just a quiet understanding that sometimes the most heroic thing a person can do is stand up, not for glory, but because the moment demands it. Ethan finally knelt beside the young man with the trembling hands and said quietly, "You don't have to be them. You know that, right?" And the boy nodded. Just once. The sheriff would come. Papers would be signed. There would be questions and likely headlines. But none of that mattered tonight. What mattered was that in a snowed-in diner no one remembered, in a man most had written off, something had stirred. Something old. Something fierce. Something human. It wasn't vengeance. It was conscience. And on that cold, impossible night, when the world had seemed too broken to fix, too tired to care, it was that which rose. From fire. From silence. From Jack. The storm broke sometime before morning. No one noticed exactly when. There was no grand moment, no fanfare, just the slow fading of the wind's cry and the soft hush of snow falling without fury. The diner, still dimly lit by emergency lamps, felt like the last room at the edge of a tired world. But something inside it had shifted. The sheriff came with the first hint of pale light, his truck pushing through the snow like a relic from a forgotten war. He stepped out in a worn hat, eyes tired, a thermos in one hand. He didn't speak much, just listened, took statements, cuffed the men with a quiet authority, and nodded when Jack finally sat down, his legs failing him not out of weakness, but relief. Emily brought him a blanket. It smelled of old detergent and fryer oil. Jack accepted it without a word. She lingered beside him, her fingers brushing his shoulder, not out of pity, but out of something warmer. A silent acknowledgement. A new kind of respect. The young man who had surrendered helped gather the shattered plates and fallen chairs. No one told him to. He just did. And when Ethan offered him a ride into town later, the kid looked at Jack first, as if seeking permission. Jack didn't say anything. He just gave a slow nod. That was enough. As the sheriff's cruiser pulled away, dragging the broken men into the consequence of mourning, the rest of the diner came slowly back to life. Someone turned on the jukebox, though it only crackled. A mother fed her child mashed potatoes from a coffee mug. The trucker paid his bill in cash and left $100 tip. And then the sun came. Not blazing. Not triumphant. Just there. Pale orange across the snowy parking lot, slicing shadows into gold and gray, catching on frostbitten windows and lighting the world with a soft, impossible hope. Jack sat by the window alone now. His cane, unneeded in those vital moments, rested beside him again. His breath fogged the glass, and his gaze was far away. Emily approached slowly and placed a cup of coffee in front of him, steaming. She didn't ask how he was. She didn't need to. "You know," she said softly, "people are gonna talk." He gave a dry chuckle. "They always do. They'll say you were some kind of hero." "I'm not." She looked at him, long and quiet. "You're something, Jack. Whether you believe it or not."
He didn't respond.
But his eyes, tired and lined with years he never shared, softened. Outside, the plows had begun to clear the road. Headlights pierced through sheets of white, carving paths back into the world. One by one, customers left. Some with thank yous, others with glances full of questions. Ethan stayed the longest. When he finally rose to leave, he stopped by Jack's booth. "You ever need help fixing that truck?" he said. "You know where I work." Jack looked up. "I might take you up on that." "Good. 'Cause I owe you for my sister, for everyone." Jack paused, then spoke quietly. "Owe me by doing better than we did." The young man nodded, eyes shining, and walked into the dawn. When the diner finally emptied, Jack remained. Not because he couldn't move, but because for the first time in a long while, he had nowhere else he needed to be. Emily came over and slid into the seat across from him. She poured herself a coffee. No makeup now. No walls. Just a woman who had survived the same night he had. "You know," she said, smiling a little, "I think I might keep the place open after all." Jack raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "It's stupid. I know. But after last night, I just think maybe it matters. Maybe this old place means something." He looked around. At the cracked vinyl booths, the faded menus, the ceiling tiles stained by time. Then he looked back at her. "It does," he said simply. The sun climbed a little higher. Outside, birds dared a song again. Inside, the last echoes of fear had turned into something else.
Not joy. Not yet.
But peace. No headlines would tell the real story. The papers might mention a thwarted robbery, a nameless veteran, a snowstorm, but they'd never capture the silence that came after. The silence that heals. Because sometimes the world doesn't end in a bang or a blaze. Sometimes it ends in snow and silence, and begins again in dawn and coffee, and the quiet return of dignity.